It's crazy how life can flip on you when you least expect it. One minute, you're making plans for the future, thinking you've got everything figured out, and the next, you're standing in the middle of a lobby with your heart in pieces. That's where I found myself just a few weeks ago, and honestly, I still can't believe it. It started with her work trips. Emma had always been ambitious, which was one of the things I loved about her. When we got married, she was upfront about her goals. She wanted to climb the ladder, build something big for herself, and I was more than happy to support her. But in the last year or so, the trips had become more frequent. "It's just temporary," she'd say, brushing it off like it was no big deal. "Once I land this new client, things will slow down." I wanted to believe her, so I did. But then there were the little things. She'd come back from these trips exhausted, which made sense, but she stopped telling me about her day like she used to. I'd ask how it went, and her answers were always vague. "You know, same old stuff," she'd say, her eyes darting to her phone, or she'd change the subject entirely. It wasn't like her. Emma had always been the kind of person who couldn't wait to share every detail of her life with me. I didn't say anything at first. I told myself I was just being paranoid, letting my imagination run wild. She was busy, that's all. But then there was the night she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to shower. It buzzed with a text, and I glanced at it without thinking. "Can't wait to see you again soon?" My heart stopped. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking, and stared at the screen. The number wasn't saved, but the message thread was long, way too long. I scrolled up and it was like being punched in the gut over and over again. Flirty messages, inside jokes, and plans to meet up. I put the phone back where I found it before she could notice. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what the hell was going on. Was this just some guy she met on a trip? Was it serious? Did she love him? For days, I wrestled with what to do. I wanted to confront her, but I needed to know the truth first. So when she told me about her next work trip, I saw my opportunity. I pretended everything was fine, kissed her goodbye like usual, and waited until she left. Then I followed her. The drive was tense. I kept thinking maybe I was making a mistake, that I'd get there and feel stupid for doubting her. But when I arrived at the hotel she'd mentioned, my stomach sank. I asked the receptionist for her room number, only to be told she wasn't registered under her name. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at the hotel bar with a man I didn't recognize. They were leaning close, talking like they didn't have a care in the world. And then she reached out, brushing his arm with her hand in a way that made my blood boil. It was intimate, familiar, something I hadn't felt from her in months. I stood there, frozen, as they got up and walked toward the elevators. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I left. I got in my car and drove, my chest so tight it felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do next. All I knew was that the woman I thought I knew better than anyone had been lying to me, and I had no idea why. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced, replaying everything I'd seen at that hotel. Emma and I had been married for 4 years, and I thought we had something solid. We'd been talking about starting a family, saving up for a bigger house, and planning vacations we'd always dreamed of. But now, everything felt like a lie. The moment I got home, I sat on the couch, staring at the wall. My brain kept trying to make sense of it. Who was that guy? Was this some fling she'd picked up on her trips? Or was it something more? The thought made me sick. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed her laptop, the one she used for work, and opened it up. We never snooped on each other's stuff before. I trusted her, but now I needed answers. Her password was the same as always, a combination of our anniversary and her favorite number. It felt like a punch in the gut, typing it in and realizing she hadn't even bothered to change it. Her email was the first place I looked. At first, it seemed normal, work stuff, bills, a few promotions from stores she liked. But then I noticed a folder labeled Personal. I clicked on it and my stomach dropped. There were emails between her and that man. Steve, his name was. They weren't just flirty messages or plans to meet up. They were about their life together. She told him she couldn't wait to see him again, how she missed their weekends, and how she hated having to come back to this mess. This mess? Was she talking about me? About our life? I scrolled further, my hands trembling. There were pictures of them at some park, smiling like they were a couple, a few at restaurants, even one of them at what looked like a cabin. She had a whole other life with this guy, a life she'd been living behind my back. I slammed the laptop shut and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't a mistake. She'd been building something with him, something I didn't even know existed. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, laughing, touching, smiling in ways she hadn't with me in months. The next morning, I decided I needed more answers. I needed to know how far this went. While she was at work, I went through her things. Her desk drawer had an old notebook, and tucked in the back was a receipt for a rental property. His name was on it, along with hers. It was a small house about 2 hours away. My chest tightened. She wasn't just sneaking around with him. She was sharing a damn home with him. I got in the car and drove to the address. Part of me didn't want to go, but I had to see it for myself. When I pulled up, the house looked normal, quaint even. There was a car in the driveway, but it wasn't hers. I sat there for a while, debating what to do. I couldn't just turn around and go home, not when I was this close to the truth. After what felt like an eternity, I finally worked up the nerve and knocked on the door. A moment later, Steve opened it. He looked surprised, but not in the way I expected. "Oh," he said, glancing past me, like he was expecting someone else. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He hesitated, then said, "I think the better question is, who are you?" "I'm Emma's husband." His face froze, and for a second I thought he was going to slam the door, but instead he stepped back and said, "You'd better come in." I hesitated. I didn't know if this was a good idea, but at that point I was already in too deep. He motioned for me to come inside, so I did. The living room was small but cozy, nothing fancy. But everything about it felt wrong. It didn't belong to Emma. It belonged to them. Steve didn't offer me a drink or anything. He just sat down across from me, looking like he was ready for whatever conversation was about to come. It felt surreal, like I was having a conversation with a stranger in my own life. "What the hell is going on?" I finally asked, my voice raw with anger and confusion. "How long has this been going on?" He looked at me like he was calculating his next move. Then he sighed. "It's been a while, man. A lot longer than you probably think. You've been sleeping with my wife for how long? You two have been seeing each other for years, haven't you?" He nodded slowly. "We've been seeing each other for over a year, yeah? She told me about you two, but, well, she wasn't happy, you know? Things weren't great between you two, and I thought maybe I could help her. She didn't seem to be getting what she needed from you." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. "She didn't seem happy?" I repeated, almost choking on my own words. "She was married to me. She promised me we'd be okay. You think that gives you the right to step in?" Steve leaned forward, his voice lower now. "Look, I didn't want this to get messy. But it has. She's been torn between the two of us for a while. I didn't want her to go back to you because I knew how this would end." I sat there, stunned. All this time, I'd been living in a bubble, thinking I had a happy marriage, only to realize Emma had been lying to me for months. I felt like I was losing control of everything. My thoughts, my emotions, the life I'd built with her. "I'm sorry, man. This isn't the way I wanted it," Steve added, his voice softer now. "But you need to know, she's made her choice, and honestly, I think you already know what that is." I couldn't respond. The truth was suffocating me. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been living a double life, and here I was, staring at the man who'd been the other half of that life. I didn't go home immediately. I couldn't. My head was spinning, and everything in that house felt like a reminder of how much I had been fooled. Instead, I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to wrap my head around the reality of the situation. I'd trusted Emma with everything. She was my wife, my partner, and yet she had been living a whole separate life without me. I couldn't shake the image of her and Steve, of them laughing, of them sharing moments that were supposed to be mine. I thought about how many times she must have lied to my face, how many times I'd been the fool, believing she was the woman I married, when in fact she had already checked out long before I ever realized it. After a couple of hours, I went back to the house. It was late now, and the place felt quieter, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stood in the doorway for a moment, not knowing how to approach this. I was angry, hurt, confused, every emotion you can imagine flooding my chest. But above all, I felt betrayed. When I walked into the living room, Emma was sitting on the couch, looking at her phone. She didn't even look up. There was no apology in her eyes, no recognition that everything had just changed. I stood there for a minute, collecting myself. Then I spoke. "You need to tell me everything, Emma. Now." She looked up, her face briefly changing, but then she went back to that calm, distant look. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. I know about you and Steve. I know about everything. You're living a double life, Emma. You've been lying to me, and I'm done pretending I don't know." Her face shifted. The mask cracked, but instead of breaking down, instead of apologizing or showing any regret, she just sighed. "I knew this day would come. You're right. I've been lying to you, but I'm not sorry for it." That hit me like a slap to the face. I had been prepared for anger, even deflection, but not this. Not for her to sit there and tell me she wasn't sorry. "You're not sorry?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've been seeing another man behind my back, lying about everything, and you're not sorry?" "No," she replied coldly. "I'm not sorry. I'm tired of pretending, tired of being something I'm not. I've been telling myself I'd leave for months, but I didn't have the courage. Steve gave me the courage." The words stung. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So all this time, you've been planning to leave me?" "Yeah, I have." She said it so casually, like it wasn't a big deal, like I wasn't sitting there watching my entire life unravel before my eyes. "Look, we've been drifting apart for years. I've been telling you and you never listened. It wasn't just the affair with Steve. It was everything. I've been unhappy for a long time." "Why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you just end it if you were so unhappy?" I asked, almost pleading for some kind of explanation. I would have respected that. I would have understood. Emma didn't meet my gaze. "Because I didn't know how to end it. I didn't want to hurt you. But staying in that marriage was hurting both of us. I couldn't keep pretending." I felt a knot in my stomach. All this time I had been oblivious to how much she'd been holding in. I thought we were doing okay. I thought we were building a future together. But she'd already checked out. She had already moved on. "Are you in love with him?" I asked, my voice breaking a little. I needed to know if this was about love or just a mistake she made while being unhappy with me. She looked away, biting her lip. "I don't know anymore. I thought I was, but now, I'm not sure. All I know is that I couldn't keep lying to you. I couldn't keep pretending we had something that was gone. It felt like everything I'd believed in, everything I'd worked for, was crumbling around me. The trust, the love, the future I thought we were going to have, gone. I didn't know if I was angry or sad anymore. All I knew was that I had been betrayed by the one person I thought would always have my back. "I don't know what to do," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know how to process this. I can't just forgive you for what you did." Emma stayed silent, and for a long moment we just sat there. The air between us was thick with the weight of everything we hadn't said, everything we couldn't take back. Finally, I stood up. I couldn't stay there any longer. "I can't be here. I can't do this anymore." I grabbed my coat and made for the door. "Where are you going?" she called after me. But I didn't turn around. I didn't need to hear her. "I don't know yet, but I'm leaving." I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house with her, pretending like everything was fine. I needed space. I needed time. I needed to figure out who I was, outside of the man she'd been lying to.